Good morning. Welcome to Adult Education at Valley Community Presbyterian Church. It says it's virtual, and maybe it will be. I'll try to be real. Hope that there will be a moment or two where you'll say, this is real. I can pay attention. If you haven't awakened yet, go get your coffee. If you've got kids, go help find them something to do, because this will be for adults only, I think. But we'll see. There's been enough going on in Israel and Palestine. There's been enough going on in the inner cities of this country for me to avoid the topic again and just talk about what's going on in the world. But I promised you that this time we would answer at least two of the questions that we ignored last time we were together. One of them is the issue of separation of church and state. And another is the separation of the spiritual and the political. There are all kinds of ways to get at the church and state one. I would like to take less time on that than the spiritual political. If you are having any questions about the church and state issue, which I have, maybe it helps you understand in this country that church and state ought to or are separated by the Bill of Rights of our Constitution. Well, maybe not by the Bill of Rights. In the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, passed 2 years after the Constitution was ratified, the First Amendment has two clauses in it that relate to the church-state issue. One is that the Congress shall make no acts to establish religion, and the other is that they will make no acts to inhibit the freedom of religion. So it makes sense for us to say, well, okay, the church and state should be separated. But as early as 1801, the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, had to establish for us that this means church and state will be separated. There was a Baptist convention in Connecticut, and they thought they ought to be able to influence government and government decision. They wrote a very nice letter to Jefferson. He wrote a very nice letter back in which he used these words: there is a wall between the church and the state. They are separate and must remain so. The wall of separation between church and state is the precedent used by the Supreme Court of the United States until today. And I say until today, it's still being used, but there are some appeals before the court right now that challenge it a bit, and we'll see what happens. I think it helps understand why church needs to be separated from state. If you think about it this way, what if this word were not church, but were synagogue? What if this word were not synagogue, but were mosque? What if this word were not mosque, but were steak? No, I didn't misspell it. Those of you who are Church of the Jesus Christ of the Latter Day understand the steak. I'm kind of glad that there's a separation between church and state, between state and stake and state, because if the Mormons said the way we do things is the way we will do things in this country, all the Starbucks and all the Caribous would close. And that would make me very sad. To take caffeine out of my diet, I don't know that I could even survive. We won't go to the taverns and the pubs and all that and what that would mean to some other people. But I hope it just clarifies for you that church and state are separated because no religion, no belief system, no faith base can establish what the governing body will do to make it possible for the people of its country to live together peacefully. I mean, why do those little boats come across the water? Because after the Reformation, if the king were Roman Catholic, the country was Roman Catholic. If the queen were Protestant, the country was Protestant. And persecution was just abounding, depending on whose side was whose side. Let's go to some place, some new land, where we can establish a freedom to be who we want to be in this religious time together. I'll say a little more about that, but not too much. We'll get to this later. The spiritual political, if we change the words here, the spiritual, that's you. The political, that's you. So these two are the same, and when they are not, there is cognitive dissonance. When you who are spiritual does something, believes something, acts differently when you are political, it doesn't feel right. Something inside of you clangs, gongs. Something says, this can't be right. For me, if I'm a Jesus, if I follow the way of Jesus, there are some things that go on politically that I cannot affirm. There are some people who lead politically that I cannot support. The reason being that I want to try to be as consistent here as I am here. I want these two to be affected by each other. So hang on to that, because we'll get back to the spiritual in a minute or so. We're honored today at this class to have a few of you present, and I welcome you all. I especially welcome the Reverend Dr. Deb DeMeester, who is here, who will be preaching to us at the 10 o'clock service. And since she's a whole lot better than I am and has a whole lot more to share than I do, I'll promise you I'll quit in time. In fact, the guys said they'd turn me off at 20 minutes to 10, so that's it. Okay. I just take this off just so we have a whiteboard. I have trouble today when someone says to me, Jim, are you a Christian? Because I have to say, either why do you ask, or what do you mean? Why do you ask? Why would it be important to you to know if I'm a Christian? Why do you ask? Because how I answer may give you a false impression of who I am. I am not a literal biblical Christian. I am not an evangelical fundamentalist Christian. I am not a member for the last 40 years of a Christian community influenced by the moral majority. Here I go. Just say a few words about the moral majority and see if you can keep it to a few words. 1976, Jimmy Carter was elected president of the United States. Jimmy Carter was an evangelical Christian. And the evangelical Christians thought, aha, we finally have somebody in the White House who we can tell what is going to do, and it will control the way the country operates. And they put pressure on Jimmy Carter, and he said, I don't know. That's what I believe is separate from how I govern. They could not convince him. So they formed an organization called the Moral Majority in 1979 for the next election, and they got behind a candidate who would allow them to influence, and he got elected in 1980 and again in 84. Ronald Reagan, 80. Ronald Reagan, 84. The Moral Majority continued to try to influence politics. In the 88 election, George H.W. Bush, and then, as Christians always do, they split. Whenever we get together, we can't agree. And so, since Pat Robertson wanted to be president, and he was a member of the moral majority. And Jerry Falwell, who was the king of the moral majority, said to Pat Robertson, "I'm sorry, I'm backing Bush." There was a schism, and it died, and the moral majority ended, except see, I do have notes once in a while. Jerry Falwell said in 1989, quote, "Our goal has been achieved. The religious right is solidly in place now, and religious conservatives in America are now in control for the duration." So if someone asks me, "Jim, are you a Christian?" I've preferred not to say yes. I preferred to say, contemporary language, I'm a Jesusist. Ancient language, I'm a follower of the way. I will do to the best of my ability what the one I follow calls me to do. I will be a Jesusist. We've tried in this country several times. We have tried to manage religion. In the 1900s, William Jennings Bryan ran for president 3 times, couldn't be elected because he was having trouble keeping his religion out of his politics. And so he finally said, "I'm not running anymore, I just want to be a religious leader." Democrats tried in 1928 to run a candidate for president, Al Smith. And Al Smith was a Roman Catholic, and he was defeated basically for the reason that nobody wanted the Pope to be in Washington, D.C., that they believed that the government would be the same as the state. We tried that again in 1960. We nominated John Fitzgerald Kennedy to be president. There were Protestant clergy communities formed throughout this country to tell the man, you can't be a candidate as a Roman Catholic unless you renounce your Catholicism. In a recent issue of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, Kennedy was quoted. Kennedy said, "I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate will tell the president, should he be a Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote." As you know, Kennedy was elected. Kennedy was assassinated. I look at the impact of our current situation in this country, with now another Roman Catholic elected as president who refuses to impose his religion on the government, but also refuses to say, "I am not affected. I am unaffected by my religion. My spirit is one that believes in not leadership for power, but leadership for purpose." I believe in liberating people, not labeling people. I believe in embracing all people in a human community of love and in a human community where everyone will strive one day to work for peace. You need to separate, and you need to be clear when you are a leader in government that you know if your religion has a place in your life, you say that, but you do not make your decisions based on that. Separate church and state. Thomas Jefferson said it in 1801. The Supreme Court has continued to say it, and I'll say it to you today. It's been mentioned to me from time to time that, Jim, you're too political. I don't think so. So that means I'm not, as long as I don't think so. One of the things I like about the Valley is that it's taken a lot of the things that I was carefully taught in my religion and helped me look at them in a new way. I mean, I think before I got here I had started to look at things in a new way, but I don't believe that my whiteness is better than people of color. I just don't believe that my maleness is better than people who are female. I don't believe that marriage should be between people who don't necessarily love each other as long as they're male and female. That marriage should be between people who love each other. I believe that Christianity is not the only way to live life eternally. I believe that political leaders are chosen by the people who vote, not by God. Even though in these recent years we have had some religious leaders attributing the choice of political leaders to God. I also believe guns kill people. And I could go on. But that's my spirit. And why do these things seem to be important to me, to us? I'm a Jesusist. When Jesus entered a community, he went from town to town. When he entered a community, he had a bit of notoriety about him, so people knew usually when he was coming. But if they didn't, he would address the Sanhedrin. He would talk to the power council. He would not ignore the people along the way, or he would not fail to sit under a sycamore tree and gather people and teach. He would not fail to take care of the needs of others as he met them. Jesus was, I don't know if this means anything to you, but it does to me. Does that make sense? Orthodoxy? Okay. Jesus was not non-orthodox. He was a good Jew. He believed the things that he was taught. But he also believed that the things he was taught were the things he should do. His practice, his orthopraxy, was as or more important than his orthodoxy. Putting simply, for school teachers, particularly of the elementary nature, Jesus was a show and tell person. Let me show you how to do this. And then go and do likewise. Why am I down here on my knees washing your feet? So you'll be down on your knees washing people's feet. Go and do. Jesus had difficulty with the scribes and the Pharisees and the priests who ran the synagogues. The difficulty was basically, when you call somebody a whitewashed tomb, that you look good on the outside, but you're all wormy on the inside, it would seem to me that you would get an indication that you were not being approved of. Jesus did not approve of people who just tell you what you're supposed to do. Tell. It's like ready, aim, 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 aim. Never fire. Never do. Let's have another committee meeting and decide what we should do over the last committee meeting that said should we do this, and we're not doing that. So we should have another committee meeting to say, why aren't we doing what the last committee meeting? You understand. You're Presbyterians, most of you. You understand. I want to talk to you about being spiritual. I'll talk to you about how I am a Jesusist. And maybe that personalization will help you see what I'm trying to say. First of all, I need to tell you, if you don't already know, that the Gospels have been ruptured from social justice by so many people because they've been held out. This is the way we should do it, not that. People wonder why I still read the Bible when it has no application to the life today. People are glad I read the Bible because they think it has application. There are two camps of people. I read the Bible because those are my spiritual ancestors. The people who wrote in the Bible are the people who are the stones on which I stand. That's a faith base for me. And I need to tell you, if you don't remember, that Jesus was a Jew. He was a practicing Jew. And that the communities that wrote the Gospels, I hope you heard the word, not individuals, the communities who wrote the Gospels were Jews. And they were Jews who were collecting stories. Stories of whom? A Jew. What kind of a Jew were they collecting stories about? That's the spiritual nature of being a follower of the way. When you went, I don't think it's quite the same today, but it's close. When you went to a worship service in a synagogue, first thing you heard was a long reading from the Torah, first 5 books of the Old Testament. Then you heard a reading from the former prophets, Joshua through Kings. Then you heard a reading from the other prophets, some called lesser prophets, some called major minor prophets, but the later prophets, Isaiah through Malachi. Worship didn't take just an hour. It was going on. And then the leader of the synagogue would say, are there any others who have stories to share that might give illumination to the passages we just heard? Well, since the Jesus followers were Jews and they had a little room in the off to the side in the synagogue where those are the people who believe in Jesus, they would get up and tell the story, a story that related to the work that was being read from the Gospels, from the Torah and the prophets. And those stories kept being told. Long after Jesus died, they began to be collected. 20 years after they died, a man named Paul collected some of them and wrote some letters. 40 years after Jesus died, a community that we'll call Mark, 70 Common Era, collected, edited. Maybe when you buy a book and this book is edited by and there are lots of different authors in it, that might be a way to think of the gospel. Mark's collection of stories covers a period of time of 5 months. And they are stories that were being related during the synagogue worship as they were collected. Follow that. They're put down. The first thing, Mark starts immediately with baptism and temptation. Jesus responding to the call, being tested to see if you really mean that you're going to follow this call. And when he says, yes, I'm going to follow this call, the next thing that happens is he's given some disciples. He picks some disciples. Let's go do something different. And what's the first story after we say, let's go do something different? The first story is one of getting rid of a demon that was possessing a person. Get out of there. You can't be who you are if you're possessed by this demon. All right, I'm just going to say, you can't be who you are if you're controlled by the past. The new has to come. Behold, the old is gone. The new has come. Out, demon, in, new way. So Mark establishes right at the beginning that this is a new way. Then he continues to show Jesus as he attempts to show that, do that, be that, until finally there's a Pilate and a crucifixion, and it's over. And then I like to end it with the word suddenly. Mark's gospel ends with the affirmation of newness and new way. And the people who realize that there's a new way are so afraid they run away from the empty tomb and they don't tell anybody. Oh my gosh. Everything I thought was the way it was isn't the way it was. Now what? And in this Markan community, they got together after editing and said, it doesn't look too good if it ends that way. So they wrote another little short ending to help us not be quite so running away. And then they read that and they said, it could be more, so there's more detailed ending. I don't deal with those two endings. They're there in your texts if you want to read them. I like, suddenly they ran away. That makes a message for me. 10 years later, we have the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew writes, Matthew collects, Matthew edits stories that cover about a year. The Jewish liturgical year. So he is collecting a number of things. The Jesus followers, the followers of the way, are sitting in the synagogue one Saturday morning, and the story of a birth of a Jewish baby named Moses. And they put Moses in a basket, and they put the basket in the Nile, and the Nile floats around, and the baby is caught, and, oh my gosh, raised by Pharaoh, and becomes a great leader of the people of Israel. Really? Matthew says, So he says, don't forget that Herod was trying to kill all the male babies. So Matthew's collection of stories has a birth narrative in it. And it's a Hebrew birth narrative. It's a male birth narrative. It's a dominant birth narrative. It's of the rich birth narrative. But it's a baby born. It's a king, Herod, who tries to kill babies born. In order to not be, we got to escape to Egypt. Where's the Nile? We got to go to Egypt. It's a story of Jesus, the new Moses. It's a new day, a new Moses. And right after the birth narrative, we go through some things, and then all of a sudden, the next synagogue day, they're reading the Ten Commandments. Now, Matthew has just finished telling a story about Jesus healing the sick, getting rid of illness, and bringing newness. So they're telling the story of the Ten Commandments, the thou shalt nots. And Jesus says, well, why don't we try? Matthew says, why don't we try some blessed ours? In lieu of a negative, you must do this or else, you must do this and be blessed. You can do this. You are a peacemaker. You can bless those who mourn, and you can be comforted and be a comforter. You can experience mercy. Oh, you might have some trouble, but don't worry about trouble. I have trouble too. Don't worry about trouble. And he follows this with chapters called the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is basically an attempt to tell us, as best as he can, as best as the collection can, this is the way you will demonstrate. This is your show and tell. You are the hearers, now go be the doers. And then, much later, what happens if you're the doer? Well, there are a lot of congregations being formed in the Presbyterian Church today called Matthew 25 congregations. When you do it to the least of these, you do it to me. Feed the hungry. Give drink to the thirsty. Welcome the homeless. Stand up for all people. Be there. Do. Then the endings of Matthew conclude with the go and do. A go and do. I'll move faster. We got to go another decade. We have to go to Luke. Luke decides to have a birth narrative as well in his collection. Luke's birth narrative is not patriarchal. It's matriarchal. Luke's is not for the wealthy. Luke's birth narrative is for the poor. How do I know that? I don't. How do I think that? Because the first people who come to the birth of the one who's going to show us a new way don't have anything. They're shepherds. They come out of the fields. They're empty-handed. When Mary says to the shepherds, "Do you want to hold the baby?" they say, "Oh, we'd love to." And they can embrace Jesus because there's nothing in the way. When you think about the ones who came called the Magi, when they got there, and Mary said, "Do you want to hold the baby?" They all said, "We got to get rid of our wealth. We got to set down our what we'll give you this as our gift so then we can embrace." It's important for you to understand that these birth narratives are part of the story of Jesus, not to be understood literally, but to be understood in this idyllic form of saying this is a way and a truth and a peace for all people, rich and poor, slave and free, male and female, Jew and Greek, all people. Luke is a converted Jew as far as scholars are concerned. There's lots of events that he records in incredible grammatically correct Greek. And then he says this: to say that the old is now new, Jesus stands up in the synagogue during worship and says, "My ministry is, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has sent me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, and to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim this as the year of the Lord's favor, and this has been done in your presence." I'm a new way. This is a new way. And how does the people respond? "Oh, goody, a new way." No, they try to kill him. They try to take him to the outskirts of the city and throw him off a high hill. And he somehow gets away. And he gets away for what? For the very next story is lifted from Mark and Matthew about the freeing of the demon. It's a new way. It's a new day. We are to walk with love in our eyes, You do know that the ending of Luke, is that walk to Emmaus, where Jesus is known. First of all, he tells the story, but he's known through the breaking of bread. He's known when he sits down at table. He's known. And Luke is saying, you have a story to tell, but you got to go and tell it. You can't just sit in the pew and say, oh boy, we got Jesus. There'll be a day when we need him, and we can follow him then. Finally, the fourth gospel is the Gospel of Matthew. Basically 100. You see, this is 40, 50, 60, 70 years after the death of Jesus. The collection of stories. There's been a destruction of Jerusalem in 70. There's been an expulsion of all followers of the way from the synagogue in 88. So these are people who are either dispersed because Jerusalem is destroyed and the temple is destroyed, or there are people who can no longer gather in their synagogue because their class got too liberal and they had to get kicked out. And these people, 12 years after they've been expelled, are a collection of all kinds of people, some of whom are very mad that they gave most of their money to the building of the synagogue and now they're kicked out of the synagogue. They're very upset about that. The reality is that the Gospel of John collects 7 decades of stories, does not contain any parables, any metaphors, any similes, just tells these stories so that finally someone says, all of this is the way and the truth, so that if you live this way and tell this truth, you will have life. For how long? Forever. You mean life doesn't end? No, life doesn't end. It was here before you were. It'll be here after you are. Life is, and you are a part of it. Okay, so now, in the middle of this is you. Are you a spiritual person who believes, I'm talking now to Christian people, to followers of the way people, are you a person who believes that the old is over, that the new has come, that love needs to be sincere, that you do not need to proclaim that you're better than anybody else, that as far as it depends on you, you will establish peace, and that when there is a need for something that you have and the other has, you'll say, I can wait because I will lay down my life for the other. That's the difference, you see, between living for power, not purpose, living for yourself, not for the liberation of others, and believing somehow that by hanging on to Jesus, you have a better handle on life than those who don't have him. When he came and showed you that the only way to have life is to let me go, to set me free. We've had a class. I don't know if we learned anything, but if we did, it's a gift from someone besides me. So I thank you for being here. I thank you for tuning in. Can we say a prayer? Alongside of life, we give you ours. Alongside of truth, we promise to our best of our ability to tell the truth. And yes, we will follow this way called the way of Jesus, because it's a life giver to others and to us. And all the people say, amen. Thank you all.